The night of my brother-in-law's rehearsal dinner. The restaurant smelled like gardenias and expensive candles. I remember thinking that was a good sign. I was wrong. My name is Sloane Whitfield. I'm 32 years old. I run a mid-sized commercial real estate firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and until 14 months ago, I was married to a man named Derek. Derek Calloway. Wait, I can't use that name. Let me start over. Derek Ashton, that's what I'll call him. Because some part of me still can't fully detach his face from the last name I gave up 2 years of my life to carry. We met when I was 28. He was charming in the way that men who grew up without money but learned to fake it always are. Knew which fork to use. Laughed at the right moments. Made you feel like you were the only woman in the room. I was working 80-hour weeks building my client base. He was managing a branch office for a mid-tier insurance company, pulling maybe $62,000 a year. I never thought that would matter. I genuinely didn't. I thought love was supposed to be bigger than a number on a pay stub. My mother warned me. Not in the dramatic way mothers do in movies. She just said, quietly, over coffee one Sunday morning, "Sloane, make sure he's proud of you, not just proud to be with you." I smiled and told her she was being old-fashioned. We got married in the fall. Small ceremony. My family's lake house upstate. Derek cried during his vows. I thought that meant something. For the first year, things were fine. Tight, but fine. I paid the mortgage because it made sense. I earned more. The house was near my office, and Derek had student loans I didn't know about until 3 weeks after we signed the papers. I paid those too eventually. Not because he asked. Because I thought that's what you do when you love someone. You absorb the inconvenient parts and you keep going. The problem started small. He'd make comments, little ones. When I got a new client, another big deal for the boss, said with this smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. When my firm was featured in a local business magazine, he left the copy on the kitchen counter without mentioning it. I found it a week later with a coffee ring on my face. I told myself I was being sensitive. His younger brother Tyler got engaged to a woman named Brooke in the spring of our second year. Brooke is lovely, warm, funny, the kind of person who remembers your coffee order and asks about your mom by name. I liked her immediately. The wedding was scheduled for the following March, and I was genuinely excited. I thought maybe a family celebration would be good for us, something to look forward to together. The rehearsal dinner was at a private room in one of those upscale farm-to-table restaurants downtown. Exposed brick, Edison bulbs, the kind of place where the prix is $200 a head, and the sommelier introduces himself by his first name. Derek's mother, Gail, had planned the seating arrangement. That should have been my first clue. Gail Ashton and I had a complicated relationship, which is a polite way of saying she had never once looked at me without calculating what I was worth to her family's social standing. She was gracious to my face and dismissive behind my back. I'd overheard her at Thanksgiving 2 years before, telling Derek's aunt that I was very career-focused, in the same tone you'd use to describe someone who collects roadkill. I arrived at the restaurant that night in a navy wrap dress, heels, a gift bag for Brooke and Tyler sitting in the crook of my arm. Derek had gone ahead earlier. He said to help with setup, though I later found out setup meant sitting at the bar with his family for 90 minutes while I handled a client emergency from my car. The room was already full when I got there. Soft music, candles, the warm hum of conversation. I scanned the table for my name card, and then I saw her. She was sitting in the chair I had been told was mine, the one to Derek's immediate right. The position Gail had specifically described to me 2 weeks prior as the family seat right next to your husband. A woman I had never seen before, already seated, already laughing at something Derek said, her hand resting on the back of his chair like she'd done it 1,000 times. I recognized her in the way you recognize something your body understood before your brain caught up. The tilt of her head when she looked at him, the familiarity in how he leaned in when she spoke. Small things, devastating things. Gail appeared at my elbow. "Oh, Sloane, we had to do a little rearranging," she said, and her smile was the most satisfied I had ever seen it. "We put you over there." She gestured toward the far end of the table, near the kitchen door, next to Derek's elderly uncle who wore a hearing aid he refused to turn up, and his wife who spent most of meals talking about their timeshare in Branson, Missouri. I stood there for exactly 4 seconds. I counted them later, lying in a hotel bed, replaying the moment. 4 seconds where I looked at the woman in my seat, then at Derek, who was looking at his phone, then at Gail, whose smile had not moved 1 millimeter. I set the gift bag down on the empty chair beside Brooke. Gently. I didn't make a scene. I caught Brooke's eye across the table and gave her the most genuine smile I had, because she didn't deserve any of this. She looked confused and a little stricken, and I mouthed, "Call me," and she nodded. Then I picked up my purse, turned around, and walked out. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry in the restaurant. I did not go back to ask Derek for an explanation, or demand Gail justify the seating arrangement, or make the evening about me instead of about my brother-in-law's wedding weekend. I walked through that front door, handed my ticket to the valet, and sat in my car in the parking structure for 11 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. Derek called while I was still in the parking garage. I watched his name light up the screen and I let it ring. He called 7 more times before I reached the interstate. I checked into a Marriott 20 minutes from our house and ordered room service, a turkey club and a glass of Malbec. And I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel every single thing I had been not feeling for 2 years. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a breakdown. It was more like finally exhaling after holding your breath for so long you forgot what normal air felt like. By morning, Derek had called 41 times, texted 19. His mother had sent one message that read, "I think there's been a misunderstanding and you should come home." I read that one twice and then set my phone face down on the nightstand. Here is what I knew and had probably known for longer than I was willing to admit. The woman in my seat was not a family friend Gail had invited at the last minute. The way she touched the back of Derek's chair. The way he didn't look up when I walked in. The way Gail had smiled. That was not rearranged seating. That was a declaration. I called my attorney the next morning. Not because I had been planning it. I genuinely hadn't. But because some decisions make themselves once you strip away the noise. Her name was Patricia Vaughn, and she had been my business attorney for 3 years. She referred me to a family law colleague the same afternoon. By that evening, I had an appointment. The thing about being financially independent in a divorce is that people assume it makes everything easier. It doesn't. It just makes it faster. The house was mine, my down payment, my mortgage, my name on the deed. Derek had contributed to the joint account we kept for household expenses, but the bulk of our assets were mine, premarital, carefully documented. I had not merged everything, which was something my mother had quietly suggested when we got engaged, and which I had appreciated in theory, but never expected to actually need. Derek hired an attorney who sent a letter suggesting that his contributions to the household, including 2 years of cooking dinner 3 nights a week and painting the guest bedroom, entitled him to a share of the equity in the house. I remember reading that letter at my kitchen table and laughing. Not meanly. Just genuinely, exhaustedly amused. 2 years of Tuesday night pasta and a Benjamin Moore accent wall. Okay. My attorney sent a response. The response was thorough. Derek dropped the claim. What I found out over the following weeks was this. The woman at the rehearsal dinner. Her name was Kayla. She worked in Derek's regional office, and they had been seeing each other for approximately 8 months. 8 months. That's 2 birthdays I planned. 1 anniversary trip to Asheville. 3 months of couples therapy where he told our counselor he felt disconnected. And I spent 45 minutes a week trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. The couples therapy part was the hardest to sit with, not the betrayal itself. The betrayal was, once I saw it clearly, almost logical. It had its own horrible internal consistency. But the therapy, sitting in that beige office with its fiddle leaf fig and its sound machine, genuinely trying, that was the thing that made me have to pull over on the way home from my attorney's office one afternoon just to cry for 10 minutes in a Walgreens parking lot. You move on. You do. Not in the clean, linear way that self-help language suggests. Healing journey, chapter closed, all of that. You move on the way weather moves. Sometimes without noticing until you're already somewhere different. Brooke called me 3 days after the rehearsal dinner. She was mortified. She hadn't known, she told me that first before anything else, and I believed her completely. She said she had confronted Tyler, who had confronted Derek, and that the resulting conversation had apparently been uncomfortable enough that Derek had avoided his brother for the better part of a week. Brooke and I got coffee that December, and we have stayed in touch. Some things survived the wreckage. Gail sent me a card after the divorce was finalized. A card. Like a condolence note, but for a marriage she helped dismantle. I didn't open it for 3 weeks. When I finally did, it said she hoped I would find happiness and that she wished things had been different. I put it in the recycling and made myself a cup of tea. The divorce was final 11 months after the rehearsal dinner. The morning my attorney called to confirm everything was settled, I was sitting at my office desk with a green smoothie I hadn't touched, and a term sheet for a commercial property in South Charlotte that was, by any measure, the largest deal I had closed in my career. I said thank you to my attorney. I hung up. I signed the term sheet. I told my assistant to order lunch for the whole office. Small celebrations, private ones, the kind nobody makes speeches about. Here's what I want to say to the version of myself standing in that restaurant parking garage 11 minutes after I walked out. You did the right thing. Not because leaving was brave, although I think it was, but because staying would have been the bravest and most pointless thing you could have done. There is no version of that night where you confront Gail in front of Tyler's guests and come out of it with your dignity intact. There is no version where you demand the seat and then sit in it, next to a man who put another woman there, and eat a $200 meal and pretend. The most powerful thing you can do when someone shows you who they are is believe them immediately. No argument, no scene. Just, I see you clearly now and I'm leaving. That's it. That's the whole thing. Derek remarried last spring. I heard through Brooke, who mentioned it gently, watching my face. I nodded and asked if she wanted more coffee. She laughed a little, relieved, and said yes. I am not angry at Derek anymore. I was, for a while. Quietly, privately, the kind of anger that lives in the chest and not the throat. But that fades. What replaced it eventually was something closer to clarity. I understand now that I was trying to make a house cat into something it was never going to be, and the failure of that project was not entirely his fault. I had a vision of what I wanted my marriage to look like, and I cast him in a role he couldn't carry, and we were both doing each other a disservice. That doesn't make what he did okay. It just makes it comprehensible. And comprehensible is enough to let go of. My firm took on 2 junior partners this year. I moved into a condo 3 blocks from my office, sleek, minimal, entirely mine. I have a standing Sunday dinner with my mother and my sister that I protect fiercely. I am dating someone who, when my name appeared in a business publication last fall, left a copy on my kitchen counter with a post-it note that said, "This is the coolest thing I've seen all week." He had underlined the part where I talked about starting the firm. I kept that post-it. I don't tell this story to relitigate the marriage or to indict Derek as a villain. He isn't a villain. He's just someone I believed in longer than the evidence supported. And Gail. Well, Gail seated another woman in my chair at her son's rehearsal dinner and smiled about it. I think that tells you everything you need to know about Gail. I walked out of that restaurant with my purse on my shoulder and my head up and I didn't look back. 41 phone calls by morning. I declined everyone. I've thought a lot about what made me walk out that night instead of staying and fighting, and the honest answer is I had finally run out of the energy it takes to pretend. That's what nobody talks about. The exhaustion isn't from the betrayal itself. It's from all the months before it, spent explaining away the signs, talking yourself out of what you clearly saw, staying in the therapy sessions and trying harder while the other person is already somewhere else entirely. By the time I saw that woman sitting in my chair, with her hand on the back of my husband's seat, some part of me wasn't even surprised. I was just done. I think there's something people get wrong about self-respect. They treat it like a reaction, like it only shows up after someone wrongs you, in the form of a confrontation or a speech or a dramatic exit. But the real version of it is quieter than that. It's the thing that, in 4 seconds of clarity, tells you this isn't fixable and you don't owe anyone a performance right now. It doesn't ask you to be loud, it just asks you to be honest with yourself and then act accordingly. Walking out of that restaurant was not brave in the way movies make bravery look. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt like the only thing I could do without betraying myself completely. And I think that's actually what integrity looks like in real life. Not a grand gesture, but the small, private choice to stop participating in something you know is wrong, even when no one is watching, even when it would be easier to just sit down and eat the dinner. What Derek and Gail chose to do had its own logic. He had been careless with something precious, And Gail, who had never fully believed I belonged in her family, had taken the opportunity to make that visible. They made those choices. They will live with what came from them. I can say that without anger now, because I've come to believe that the consequences people bring on themselves are rarely as satisfying as you imagine revenge would be, and far more thorough. Derek didn't need me to punish him. The life he's building on that foundation will do that work on its own, quietly, over time. What I know now, a year out, is this. The version of myself who signed those divorce papers and then went back to her office and closed the biggest deal of her career was not someone who got lucky or got rescued. She was someone who had spent years quietly building something. Skills, financial independence, a reputation, a sense of her own worth that nobody could take away by rearranging the seating chart. That foundation was there before Derek. It will be there long after. The most important thing I did in that marriage wasn't anything I did for him. It was keeping my own name on my own assets, trusting my own instincts when they were screaming and refusing, in the end, to make myself smaller to fit a space someone else designed for me. 41 calls by morning. I want you to sit with that number for a second. Not because it proves anything about him. It doesn't. It proves something about that moment of clarity on my end, and what happens when you finally mean it. I meant it